Hello and welcome to World Civilizations 2. We are studying world history from 1500 to present day. We are on chapter 43 today, and it's called The Totalitarianism Refined the Nazi State. And here it has a picture of a Nazi parade, and they really talk about on the front page a major reason for the Nazi success was the masterly touch of drama accompanying the party's function. Slogans, banners proclaim the party's strength in every part of the homeland, fostered the impression of overwhelming force. You can find these different movies and films on YouTube, but there were some very artistic filmmakers at the time that were filming these great dramatic displays of nationalism or nativism or just, the Nazi regime. Okay. All right, so there is a quote to begin your chapter. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to make a revolution. One makes a revolution in order to establish a dictatorship. George Orwell, 1984. Whoa. Okay. Let's see. This gives you the progression of Adolf Hitler takes charge, Munich, Putsch fails, the Mein Kampf when he writes it, Great Depression in Germany, Hitler becomes chancellor, and the Enabling Act. It goes through it. Nuremberg laws on race, Nazi preparation for war, harassments of Jews intensifies, and Wannsee Conference and the final solution for Jewish extermination implemented. So this goes through the governmental, where you're looking down and you're seeing all this happening. But there's an amazing book, and it's called Defying Hitler by Sebastian. Oh, I'm going to try this once. It's not going to work. Who wrote the book Defying Hitler?
Here's what I found on the web for who wrote the book Defying Hitler.
Sebastian Haffner. Sebastian Haffner wrote this book. He was a German. His father was a department store head, owner, president, and he was a lawyer. And he sees it from the bottom up. So he was at a party, read this book in grad school. He was at a party with a girlfriend, and the SS began to come in. Different SS soldiers came in and started pulling people out of the room. They weren't sure what was going on. Then whole neighbors, whole homes of neighbors would disappear. And if you said anything about the neighbors, it was illegal to say anything about them. It was illegal to report that they were missing. It was illegal to talk about it. So it was all fear, silence, or your family would be next. Then it talks about how he had to actually go to like a camp for a couple weeks and dress and, march around and that sort of thing. And he did it. He didn't want to. He actually did help his Jewish best friend leave the country. And he later had a girlfriend that he ended up marrying, and he helped her leave the country as well. So one thing to note is a lot of the German Jews did get away. Okay. When you have the percentages of Polish Jews or, Slavic Jews, they did not have the same opportunity to flee. And many of those Jews did flee in time, but of course, not all of them, right? German Jews were exterminated as well. It talks about the final solution, something I just wanted to share with you. The Hebrew Union College, I went there I went on a tour of their archive, and I asked them, what is your, prized possessions here? Your best archive substances that you have. And they said two things. They said, we have a telegram from a spy within the German state who was the first person to telegram a Jewish rabbi, and I want to say in Europe or Switzerland. They were having a conference, The rabbis were having a conference in Switzerland, I believe, and this spy says what the final solution is, and this telegram says what it is and calls it the final solution, and that's the first time it was ever used in history, and they have that telegram at Hebrew Union College, as well as they have several audio tapes, and I also believe video of Martin Luther King Jr. in several synagogues, because he actually spoke at several Jewish synagogues, because Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't just about fighting for black rights. He really joined hands with the Jews in the United States to help them also fight oppression and racism as well. Okay, so this Sebastian Haffner, one of the neatest things, he's the one who wrote Defying Hitler. If you're interested in this sort of stuff, this might be the most fascinating book I've ever read, because it really shows a ground level view of what happened in Germany. And so I told you he was a lawyer, went to law school. So he begins noticing that all of the judges that went by the law, and you have to understand something, Germany was more of a democracy and had more democratic checks and balances than the United States did. So that should be terrifying. There is a wonderful professor, and he says this, a nationalist, his name is Timothy Snyder, he's a professor at Yale, and I gave you an opportunity to get some bonus points if you watch Lessons on Tyranny, 20 Lessons the 20th Century Has to Teach Us About Tyranny. So this man also said this fantastic quote, and it goes like this. A nationalist says, "Oh, that would never happen here," only to witness his country do horrific, inhumane deeds. But a patriot says, "Oh, that could happen here, but please help me. Let's come together and let's stop it." All right, so that difference in denial, just being very wary of that intense, arrogant denial. Anyway, so I was telling you about Sebastian Haffner. So he begins going in, doing cases, defending different clients, and he notices that all the judges that have been trained in the law, gone to law school, are gone. And in their place are SS soldiers, or just different soldiers or men that that Hitler placed in there, and they had no idea what they were doing or how to rule or use the Constitution. And so these lawyers just pretended to go along with it, because if they said anything, they would be sent to a concentration camp and killed. Any political disturbance at all. And that is, really talks about later when he calls an emergency rule. Okay. All right. So you have a list of different things that happened. The Nazi program, he writes in Mein Kampf, My Struggle. He talks about anti-Semitism was one of the things he talked about in Mein Kampf, rejection of the Versailles Treaty. And it was a treaty that was extremely unfair. It was totally over punishment, okay, to Germany. Confiscation of illicit war profits aimed at Jews. Protection of the middle class from ruinous competition. And land redistribution of the peasants, okay. He had a whole land thing that he felt that land was scarce and the German people needed more land, and it was scarce because of the Jews. And I just want to point out something called scapegoating, because on page 565 it does talk about, how did he do this? How did he seize the power? Why did he pick the Jews? And you need to know a word called scapegoating. Scapegoating means that a group, we've talked about core periphery in our history analysis words. Choosing a group to put all the blame on, instead of, maybe looking at yourself or the government or, learning from other countries, just deciding to blame someone. So it's very much a narcissistic view. And when you scapegoat, you say all these problems are because of the Jews. Well, then when you remove the Jews, something happens. There's still all these social problems. Okay. So, in America, if we want to blame all our problems on the immigrants, guess what? When you remove the immigrants or illegal immigrants, there are still problems. This is called scapegoating. Okay. So if you want to blame all your problems in society on, the urban blacks, and you make them your scapegoat, same problem. Even if you were to remove them, all these social problems still exist. So instead of scapegoating, which is a pattern in history that does not work and usually ends in, mass incarceration or, in this case, genocide, just sit down, solve the problems, learn from other countries how they solve the problems and that sort of thing. Scapegoating is extremely dangerous. And people, government downfalls don't just happen. They're human downfalls that perpetuate and just have power, take on some power. So people who blame everyone for everything that they do, and that that's not true. So just be careful, and listen in the media about what different leaders are saying about scapegoating. And fear was a huge basis of Hitler's rise to power. Unemployment was terrifying. Okay, it went from 2.25 million in 1930 to more than 6 million. And then you can see once he bolsters his army and he builds infrastructures and roads because he's preparing for a war, it goes down to 400,000 are unemployed. So he did take care of the problem. In some cases, he did keep his promises. And a lot of cases, he, if you knew exactly how he kept his promises, they would be extremely horrified. Two things about Hitler that I thought were really interesting on this framing history, the puzzle of his rise to power, is he was a very strict vegetarian and a teetotaler, which a teetotaler is someone who doesn't drink at all. Okay. All right. He was a man of contradictions. A lot of things that he said made no logical sense, lots of circular reasoning and that sort of thing. Emergency rule. We do know, I didn't see it in here, but Hitler rises to power and then he creates a crisis. You have to be very careful. I really don't like conspiracy theories, but historians really truly believe that when the Reichstag burnt, that it was SS soldiers. There's evidence that SS soldiers and that Hitler burned it himself to create a mode of panic, to go into emergency rule. All right. The Jewish question wasn't just the Jews. I mean, it was a genocide against the Jews, but Slavs, Gypsies, and other minorities deemed unfit for the future Nazi state. Many of them were people with disabilities. Also, many gays. It is absolutely horrific what they would do to see if you were gay or not. Just illicit generals and would watch and put you in a box with a woman and see how you responded and judge you based. I mean, can you imagine being watched in such a terrible sexual situation, and then they were going to base whether or not you were gay or not based on how you reacted? We read some accounts of that when I was in grad school, and whether you were or you weren't, you absolutely may not be able to do what these very sick generals wanted you to do in order to clear your name so you wouldn't be exterminated. Yeah. Some monsters. Dehumanizing. Okay. I love the quote that says, you never have to ask a dog to be more of a dog, but you often have to ask a human to act more like a human, because there is dehumanization. And usually dehumanization and scapegoating go hand in hand with abuse, oppression, and atrocities. Okay, the Jewish question talks about the Nuremberg laws, where they were made non-citizens. Now, something you need to understand about Jews in Europe, very, very different treatment than what you understand of Jews here. Yes, there is racism, absolutely, and it, obviously Martin Luther King Jr. Joined hands with the Jewish synagogues to combat it. But there is a different kind of racism in Europe, to the point that there were laws 300-400 years ago where Jews could not own land. They were not allowed to be citizens 300-400 years ago. Okay, so it's just a deeper kind of thing that we don't understand unless we read and research it. What kind of, deep hatred and racism is just different in Europe. So we talked about the final solution. It escalated, and I'll tell you the groups of Jews that were exterminated in the greatest amounts and volumes and saw the worst brutality were the Polish Jews, the Slavic Jews, Jews that were outside of Germany were exterminated at an accelerated rate. All right. Okay, so where did fascism come from? It was really borrowed from Mussolini. You see him talk about that. Okay. And this Nuremberg race laws and pseudo scientific racism, and how much Jewish blood and German blood can mix, just absolute, it's lunacy. It's just crazy. All right. We talked about the unemployment went down. Trying to see if there's something else that we missed. Okay, I don't think so. Talked about Heinrich Himmler, the Gestapo, the SS. Talks about Hitler was born in Austria. Most of the SS soldiers that were in charge of concentration camps were from Austria. They actually volunteered more from Austria, and they were kind of more an elitist, richer, more elite country. All right, I think that's it. Okay, well, good luck on your quiz. And, you see this building of the Nazi state and getting ready for war and coming up to World War II. All right, have a lovely evening.